Good evening everyone, it's Donald again. Welcome to the 4th edition of Fond Memories. It's been a couple of weeks since I recorded. Things have been kind of busy with work and officiating the evening, so it's hard to find time to actually sit down and record, but today was a good day, so I have some time to record on a very special topic. Tonight I'm going to talk about my CYO basketball team that I played for, the St. Mary's Saints, class of 1988. While our team didn't particularly do anything special on the court, the mere existence of our team basically kicked off the modern generation of St. Mary's CYO basketball and other sports. So again, while our team didn't do particularly well overall, in some ways our team was the start of a new generation that lasted until St. Mary's closed back around 2016. So for tonight, what I'm going to cover is how our team got started, then jump into an overview of our entire season. I actually have a pretty good memory of most of our games and some other things I'll mention. And then lastly, I'll just conclude with some other miscellaneous items that weren't covered from the first two topics. So let's get started. So before I talk about our class's basketball team from 1988, I will want to acknowledge the fact that St. Mary's, both the school and Old St. Mary's Church, had a lot of history in basketball participation. I've seen articles and things written about those old teams. But for tonight, to keep the video short, I will not talk about those old times. Maybe I'll talk about it in the future. It's actually pretty cool history, but it would probably be well served to talk about it separately. As far as my team, or my class's team, I guess I can just talk about myself first, as to give some context, right? I attended St. Mary's from 6th to 8th grade. Previous to that, I went to Commodore Stockton from kindergarten to 5th grade. So when I came to St. Mary's to start 6th grade, I had no idea about team sports. The only thing my classmates and other classes did was play in the yard during recess, and their football, maybe basketball, and also have recess or during the lunch hour over at Chinese Playground, which is now called Willy Woo Woo Wong Playground. We also, I can't quite remember, but I know in 8th grade we definitely had physical education or PE class a little bit. I don't remember we had PE officially during my 6th and 7th grade years. So again, as far as I was concerned, I had no idea of team sports. I love watching the Warriors and stuff, but I never thought about playing myself. I don't know if my classmates did either. So, you know, went through 6th and 7th grade with no team sports, just did my usual thing during school. Then fast forward to our 8th grade year, 1987 and 88. We had a new teacher come into the school, Mr. James O'Grady. I think he came from a school that's still around over here out in the Crocker Amazon, Epiphany. I think he did science and math. I don't quite remember the subjects he taught. But yeah, he started teaching for our 8th grade class. And then how our team got started was due to Mr. O'Grady. Due to his experience at Epiphany, he was interested. He was a little surprised to see that we had no team sports. So I just remember sometime probably mid to late November, he asked the class, the boys at least, because it was boys basketball season, if we were interested in forming a basketball team. We're like, sure, why not? I think we ended up, for our class, we had 11 boys from our 8th grade class sign up, and then we also had one 7th grader who joined the team. Once the team was kind of organized, Mr. O'Grady started practicing. We would use the schoolyard for practice. When we weren't able to use the schoolyard, maybe because it was occupied after school, we would go over to Chinese Playground to practice. Can't remember all the specific details of the practices, but I do remember a couple of times we would scrimmage some of the kids just on the playground that happened to be playing there. Mr. O'Grady would try to act as a referee, as an official. The other playground kids were probably like, what the heck are you doing? They've probably never seen it before. But that definitely was our early team and how we got ready for our initial and only CYO season. So that's basically the background of how our team got started. Nothing too exotic. But now that we've talked about how that got started, let's talk about how our season went. Alright, now that we talked about how the team got started and a little bit of how our practices went, let's talk about our season. Starting with some of the preseason games we had before the CYL season actually started. I recall our first ever game was held at the St. Bridget Church, or the formerly St. Bridget Church. It's now closed and I think owned by the Academy of Art or some other collegiate organization, at the basement of the church. If you've never been to St. Bridget gym, because it was in the basement, the ceiling was kind of low. The court was fairly small, but hey, places, any place to play basketball is a good place to play. And I remember going in, and we were down. Didn't play well to start the game. We were down something like 19-4 right off the bat. I seem to recall our longtime CYO legend Ben Legier might have been officiating, and I think maybe he was officiating to check out how our team was and maybe slot us into the right division. We'll talk about our regular season later. But after our first game, where we were down 19-4, we actually did okay in the second half. We ended up losing 35-28. I don't remember anything else about the game. I know I didn't do particularly well myself, but we'll talk more about that later. So after that first kind of scrimmage game, we had two other games that followed, I think around December, maybe around the holidays. I don't remember the exact dates. I recall playing at St. Emedius Gym, which still exists today, but though the school itself is closed, St. Emedius, the gym, is still around. While I don't have any confirmation, but based on what I know of CYO history at that time, we were most likely entered into the San Francisco Fire Department, or SFFD Flame Tournament. Don't know what division. They usually have upper, lower, all sorts of mixed divisions. No, none of that detail. I have no idea. But I do remember we played two teams. One was St. Anne and one was St. Gabriel. Have very vague recollections of the St. Anne game. I think we did lose that game. Definitely remember the St. Gabriel game for a couple of reasons. One, I just remember we battled pretty tough, and I remember my teammate Jason Wong hit a couple of free throws to tie the game at 40 to send the game into overtime, and I think we ultimately ended up losing that game 48-40, unfortunately. The other thing that I remembered, which is a bit of a negative, but I'm going to mention anyway, was, and keep in mind this is 1980s, right? There was a bit of racism going around. There were fans in the stands who I remember, because my coach saw it or heard it, that were calling either us, the coach, whoever, calling us Chinamen. And then after the game, we got into no fights or anything, but a lot of back-talking, back and forth between our team and their team. It's a different time, different generation. I don't know what happened to those people. I hope that whatever racism that they had in their hearts, I hope it's kind of gone away. And that they're kind of productive members of society. Because, if they're still around, be interesting to hear from them and see why they were that way. But that's a whole different subject for another time. So that covers basically our very brief 3 preseason games. So now let's jump into our regular season. So I just talked about our 3 preseason games, and now we're going to jump into the regular season, where we played our CYO games. Now, I actually have pretty good memories of that season, even though it's been years. But I will mention, and you'll see on the screen here, that I'm sharing some final CYO standings from that season, the 1987-88 season. I mentioned Ben Legier, legendary CYO official, but also organizer. Some years ago, when I was coaching some St. Mary's teams, I actually asked him if he had any records of our team, and he sent over a couple of things. Unfortunately, he didn't send me the season schedule, but he did send me the standings. So the standings are good, because I do remember most of the games. There may be a few things I don't have much detail, but what I'm going to do here is talk about each of the teams as they're listed on the schedule and what I recall from each of the games. Starting with first, let's talk about St. Vincent de Paul. So number one, you see SVTPs listed with the X. They were actually noted as the city champion that season. Now, here's the funny thing. St. Vincent de Paul was the only game I missed during that season. I seem to recall a game might have been in the afternoon at St. Vincent de Paul. St. Vincent de Paul, for those who don't know, is down in the Marina District of San Francisco. I think I may have just forgot about it, maybe slept late on a Friday night and just overslept and just forgot about it. Regardless, I didn't make the game. But I heard from my teammates that we actually won our game. That was actually our first win of the season. It was the second to last game of our season. We were winless up to that point, but somehow we won, and I find it kind of interesting that St. Vincent de Paul would end up winning the league championship that year. So, interesting tidbit. The second team on the list is Our Lady of Pillar, or OLP, as a lot of people these days would call them. So, Our Lady of Pillar is a church organization from Half Moon Bay. I seem to recall we played OLP down at St. John, which is near the Glen Park, BART Station, Glen Park kind of area. And we hung tough with them. I think we ended up losing by 3, if I recall. Something like 46-43, whatever the score was. Again, this might sound familiar later with a couple other situations, but you have to remember back in those days, 1987-88, three-pointers actually were not particularly used, I think, at that time. If I recall looking it up on Google, high schools didn't start, had just only recently started using the three-point line. CWIL teams had not adopted the three-point line at that point. So for the games we ended up losing by 3, well, we didn't have a chance to even tie it. Everyone's kind of spoiled these days about Curry shooting threes. Well, we didn't even have the opportunity. So I think our team was one of the last few generations, along with all the other teams in CWIL, were the last generation of teams to not play with the three-point line in CYO. So, unfortunate, but it is what it is. The next team is listed is OLM number 2. OLM stands for Our Lady of Mercy, which is based in Daly City. That game was our first regular season game of the year. We lost that game 21-20. I remember for a few reasons. Number one, our first game ever was played at Sacred Heart Cathedral at their old gym. For those who are familiar with Sacred Heart today, they have a new gym, but we played at their old gym. Secondly, I remember because we hung tough again, theme of our season, but we lost the game 21-20. But I do remember teammate Kevin Chung running through, trying to do a sweeping hook shot. He missed it. I think my teammate Larry Wong rebounded, had a chance to put it back up, but just could not put that in, and we ended up losing. Tough way to lose. And if you look at our final standings, you'll see a few missed opportunities, or we might have been in the playoffs. Maybe we even could have won, but, well, it is what it is. Next team is St. Peter Pac, or St. Peter's Pacifica. So St. Peter's Pacifica is a church, obviously in Pacifica, California, which is still there. Some interesting recollections of that game. I believe we played St. Peter's on a Friday night at 7:45 or so. Knowing the game was fairly, not that far, but, you know, first time being there for that gym, we had my dad drive me. I think my dad and mom were with me at the game. They drove. We got there really early. We found it. But interestingly enough, we had about 12 members on the team. Well, only about 5 of us showed up on time, including myself. So my game at St. Peter's was my first and only ever start in CYO, if I recall correctly. The rest of my team did show up a little later, but we were down by, I don't know, 15 at halftime, ended up losing by 20. But hey, you know, first ever CYO start, I guess that should be a memory. Fun times. The St. Peter's gym today still pretty much remains the same, still like a cracker box and still pretty small. Next team is St. Finbar. Really don't have any recollection of the game. Pretty sure we lost. But I believe we played at the Epiphany gym, not the current one for those who are familiar with the current Epiphany gym, but the old gym that was at a kind of like a, I guess, built out of the church, because the walls were kind of out of bounds. The gym was long enough for a basketball court, but the sides were a little bit short, so you literally you would have to hit the wall to go out of bounds, so it's kind of interesting. So I don't really have any recollection of that particular game besides that we showed up and played. But I had obviously other memories from my coaching days after I graduated from St. Mary's at the old Epiphany Gym. The next team is St. Stephen. Similar to Our Lady of Pillar, OLP, played a team tough, but we lost, again, I think by 3. You know, like I said, there's a lot of themes that went throughout this whole season. But we also played the game at what now today is the Bayview YMCA, but in the past it was All Hallows, a school, which is now closed, unfortunately. So, you know, again, one reason why I'm doing some of these historical fond memories is, you know, one is for myself, two is for my classmates and friends who may be interested in hearing about the history, but also to others who are interested in the history of COL, because, you know, my day when we played, there's a lot of places that, you know, they're still around, but some of them aren't the same anymore. So including All Hallows. The floor changed and whatnot. Looks a lot better today than it was back then, but hey, you know, it's interesting times to play. All Hallows, by the way, I guess I should mention, was located down in the Bayview Hunters Point area off of 3rd Street. The next game, or next team, is St. Anne number 1. We lost that game, obviously, but the fond memory that stands out was it was my first time, and I think my team's first time playing at what is now, or actually what still is, Kezar Pavilion. Yep, we got a chance to play at Kezar for a COL game. If you haven't ever played at Kezar, the Warriors played there briefly. It is a professional size basketball court, so a very long court, full length, not high school length, but professional length. The floor was bouncy. So that's some standout memories, man. You really don't get a chance to play on that court too often. I mean, high schools play on it now. I'll still play on it as of today. I've actually refed on it for playoffs and other type of games, so pretty cool to go back. But back then, you know, you didn't realize the significance of Kezar when you're young, but when you're older and you look back, wow, there's a lot of history there. So those were some pretty fun days. The next team and final team will be St. Monica. Now, you see our record there. We're 2-6. I talked about our first game, St. Vincent Paul, which we won. Well, it's interesting that, you know, the 0-8 team, well, that was our last game of the season against St. Monica, and we actually won. I think 38-28. There was a school newspaper article that was published about the win. Unfortunately, I don't think I have it, but I didn't scan it, so probably won't show it here this time. But yeah, we won. St. Monica, the school, the gym is still around. St. Monica stands out for a few reasons, right? Again, it's one of those basement type gyms. The court's decent size, not full size, but the interesting part is the ceiling's super low. So when I coached my teams that played at St. Monica, the ceiling was low. I think the kids who like to shoot 3-pointers, which again we didn't have back then, they would sometimes hit the ceiling. I don't remember if we actually did that because, again, we didn't play with a 3-point line back during our season. So that basically covers our regular season. We ended up 2-6. You see our record. We finished basically 7th place out of 8 teams. A couple of games here and there we might have won. We actually might have made the playoffs. Maybe have a chance for a championship, but we unfortunately did not. But it's okay. Like I said in the beginning, why I want to talk about this was the fact that it's good to recall the memory, but also understand that our team was kind of one of the, in a way, even though part of the revitalization of St. Mary's sports that moved on until around 2016. All right, now that I've done talk about regular season, I have a few other kind of minor details just to go over, and then we'll wrap it up. All right, now that I went through the history of our team and an overview of our full season, let's wrap up with a couple of details, historical things that are of interest. First, let's talk about our jerseys. If you look at the 2 team photos I had, unfortunately they're both black and white. One team photo, which looks like we have kind of dark, somewhat dark colored jerseys. That photo was from a newsletter or newspaper, if you want to call it, that's distributed home to the families of St. Mary's School, called the Aurora. There was an article written about our team that was published. My mom actually saved the article, and I had it, and I've scanned it, and that's why I still showed. I was able to show it here. Those were our, that team photo showed us wearing basically our red colored jerseys. Now, at some point during the season, we ended up getting some lighter or white colored jerseys, and you'll see that in the other photo which I've published. Now that photo was taken from a school newspaper that's distributed among the student body. That was taken, I think the team photo was taken after our season had ended. Now, I don't recall how many games we wore with the red jerseys and how many we wore with the white, but there's some interesting background on both sets of jerseys, right? So the red jerseys, if I don't have any historical backing with it, but I believe someone told me those jerseys dated back to possibly back in the 70s, like what the old St. Mary's teams were, when the original older generation St. Mary's teams were playing. So that was interesting. As far as the white jerseys go, you'll notice it doesn't say St. Mary's, it says SM. One would assume, hey, Donald's a St. Mary's grad, talking about St. Mary's, it just means St. Mary's, right? Well, not quite so simple. Our coach, or AD, Mr. O'Grady, actually talked to St. Monica, and somehow I guess they had extra old jerseys or whatnot, and we got a set of jerseys from St. Monica. That's why it says SM. Of course, nobody cares these days. If you look at it, you know, if someone published photos of someone, everyone's going to assume it meant St. Mary's, but obviously it did. A couple other interesting historical bits, right? On the photos I'm showing with the red ones, where it shows number 9, that wasn't my jersey. My number was 20. I think you can see me in one of the photos, the back of me, wearing number 20. Unfortunately, that number wasn't around when I went back to St. Mary's at one point to look at some of the old stuff. But I said I'm going to keep one anyway, just for historical memory and whatnot. The same thing for the white jersey. I got it just for memory, but that number 42 is actually mine. You'll see in the team photo that I'm actually wearing number 42. I think I might have the shorts too, but the shorts didn't say anything special, so I don't remember where I put it, but I definitely have the jerseys still lying around. The other thing, as far as historical, this is going back for more CYO bits. If you remember, I'll show it on screen again, the standings, the final standings that we have for our season, you notice there's some multiple divisions listed there, and you notice the way it's organized is something like, oh, you've got the grade, and then you've got a whole bunch of letters and numbers and descriptors that are, I guess you can call it a classification. So for example, the top division back in those days were 8th grade A1 upper division. The second division was 8th grade A2 middle division, and so on and so forth. Our team was 8th grade B2 middle division, right? So those old days were pretty cool in terms of how the league was organized. You had A leagues, B leagues, and then in the A leagues you had an upper, middle, lower classification. Same thing with the B leagues. That lasted until at least around, I want to say, maybe around the late 90s, early 2000s when I was still coaching, where CYL finally decided to just go with 8th grade and a division number. So 8-1 is the top division for 8th grade, 8-2 is the second division, and so on and so forth. Makes it easier for people to understand, but as someone who lived through playing and coaching in the old way of A upper, middle, lower, B upper, middle, lower, it was actually pretty cool to have it the way at least the CY organized it back in those days. Won't bore everyone to death with the details, but you know, there's some fun times using that system, and in some ways I miss it. But you know, hey, the modern system works fine too. But you know, the old days were kind of cool. And I actually thought of something that's not on script, so I'm going to talk about it anyway. Then I'll wrap up. I just recalled. I didn't talk about one thing, our coach. So when we had the team started, when Mr. O'Grady asked us to start the team back in the day, I kind of forgot about this, but we had an alumni named William Wong coach us. I remember William, but facially, but I don't know much about him. But he was our coach for maybe a few games. In fact, he was the coach that I was referring to that, when we had that racist incident at St. Emilius against St. Gabriel, that reacted to it. But what happened was at some point, due to CYL, and this is one of the things that probably hasn't changed a whole lot, I mean, maybe in terms of how it's implemented, but CYL had participation rules, which still exist today. It's actually a little bit stricter today than how it was back then. But I think William didn't particularly like the participation rule, especially when we had so many players. It was hard to, compete playing with 12 players or whatever. I think he ultimately, at some point, quit during the season. And then Mr. O'Grady ended up coaching the team. That's why Mr. O'Grady is actually in our team photos as the coach versus William, who's there maybe for a few games. But William actually would end up coming back after the next season when the one 7th grader who was on our team ended up playing with his class in 8th grade again, and they actually ended up winning the championship, which was pretty cool. So, interesting piece of history there. Anyways, this video's gone on pretty long, longer than probably I expected, but it's okay, good to share. Thank you for listening and watching. As I pointed out, our team didn't do anything special. Went 2-6 in league, 2-9 overall. But with Mr. O'Grady starting the team, he would leave a few years after. The new people who came in after kept the program going. First started slowly, but we grew it. And the program stuck around until the school closed in 2016, which is actually pretty cool. It's unfortunate. Maybe I'll talk about some of the teams that I had after I left, after I graduated from St. Mary's, as a bit of a look back during those times. But for now, I'm done. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the trip down memory lane. Part of it's personal, talking about St. Mary's, but also look back at some of the old things that CYL used to do. So have a great rest of your weekend, and I will be back next time for another edition of Fond Memories.